All right. So as I mentioned, so this is your new segment.
You,
What up, Buttercups?
that's amazing.
This
Yeah,
is-
you
this
did
is-
warn me that I don't know if warn's the right word. You did let me know that the title would be, I would enjoy it. And you're right. It's,
We have been
I'll
talking
take
about
it.
a year to come up with something.
Yeah, I wish this was run past me, that I was given an option to maybe.
You've been given plenty of
I
options.
would like to have countered this potentially, but I'll take. You know what? At the end of the day, I'll take it.
All right. So as I mentioned before, Kyle and I. We're just going to kind of talk a little bit about just the changes, buyer broker agreement, and all that kind of good stuff. Keep in mind, Kyle and I sat down on Wednesday to record this. So
Yep.
this is prior to Dwayne Fouts' big public Zoom call.
Yeah, that is tomorrow.
And so we just want to be clear in case we repeat some stuff or something's changed in the last
Sure.
couple days.
Yeah. Feel free to continue listening. But if you were on the Zoom call with Dwayne, I'll actually be on that with him as well. We're definitely going through this stuff, but maybe there's something I say here that's a little different or worded differently that is beneficial. So,
All right, my first question is what I don't necessarily want to call them myths, but what are the things that we are hearing out there, whether we are on these Facebook groups for agents, you're hearing a lot of stuff from agents, you're hearing a lot of agents tell other agents things, and what things are they saying that aren't necessarily true or not necessarily confirmed yet, and that we need to just step back and just talk to our broker?
Yeah, I would. I for that reason, I'm talk to our broker. It's I steer clear of that. I know what you're referring to as far as the forums. There's a lot of back and forth there. I think I would just be wary of anyone proclaiming to know exactly where this is all headed. And speaking in definites. None of us are, this is new for all of us. It's coming in hot, it's coming quick, it's happening, but we don't know the path that this is going to take once the change happens. And just to clarify the dates, the August 1st date is when ARMLS is going to remove the commission section from their site. And so there will no longer be this unilateral broadcast commission. AAR is also coinciding their release of the new forms on August 1st so that those two things go hand in hand. The 17th is when the settlement kind of declares that the changes must be made, but this is happening for us in Arizona, or at least here in the Valley, come August 1st. And so that's where you're getting kind of the 1st versus the 17th. But I would just, to me, it just there's so many people out there talking, and understandably so. This is a big change for us. It's different than we've had for years and years and years. But it's a little bit frustrating with the stuff that you read where people are, they speak in definites and they know how this is going to go and this is exactly what's going to happen. And it's like, I wouldn't pretend to know because it could take a million different paths, and it'll all sort itself out. We'll all start figuring it out as this comes up, beginning of August and moving forward. But just be cautious of the information that you're reading. There's no one person, there's no group of people that know exactly where we're headed. So,
all right. So, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is there will be a certain date, and I'm going to ask you what that date is because there's a lot of confusion. But we'll wake up one day, and we will not, according to the policies set forth by NAR, we will no longer be able to show a buyer a home without having a signed buyer broker agreement. Is that true or false? And if it is true, is it August 1st? Is it August 17th? For me, that's the confusion on the date.
Understood. And that's a good point. There's nuance to that. The definitive date is August 17th.
Okay.
So that is when it becomes a mandate. For agents in the Valley, the practical date is going to be August 1st. You're going to have a little bit of a run-up because when those commission fields come off of MLS, there's no longer this, like I said, there's no longer this place where commissions or compensation is housed. It now has to be a conversation, and it should have been a conversation. We've all known this is coming, so it should be very front of mind as far as conversations with clients go. But that's when, you know, the commission's coming off or the compensation field's coming off. So the 17th is when kind of the settlement declares that the rule begins. The 1st is when, you know, it'll practically happen for our agents here. As far as what document to have, yes, you will need a signed agreement that establishes compensation with your buyer. That there is a new buyer broker agreement coming out that will be on the 1st as well.
And have you been privy to that? Do you
Yep.
have any idea
Yeah.
of what some of the changes look like?
Yeah, it's so Dwayne and I were both part of the committee that put that together. You know, you go off the old form. Anytime you're updating a form, you go off the old form. What could be better? What changes need to be made? You just essentially update it for current times. Obviously, this update is significant. The form itself, in practice, will be very similar to what we're used to as far as what the document does for us. But the document itself went from 2 pages to 3 pages. There's a lot of new information or new documentation. It's very well laid out as far as, you know, making sure that that it's proven that the client is understanding that compensation is fully negotiable. That's kind of across the board on the documents. That language has been bolstered. But the impact of the form will be very much the same. So we have a new buyer broker, but we also have, you know, there's 2 forms. There's a buyer broker exclusive employment agreement that we've had, and that's now been updated, a new one. But there is a fully new form that's called, I believe it's, don't quote me on the title, but I believe it's the buyer broker showing agreement. And how it's been kind of tossed around as far as explaining the difference between the two is the buyer broker exclusive employment agreement is a binding contract between you and your buyer. It's the married form. The showing agreement is kind of the dating form. So it's a little less, in the mind of a potential buyer, it may be a little less invasive or substantial, as in, I don't know you yet. I just met you, buyer's agent. I don't know that I want to be committed to you for 3, 6, 9 months or whatever you're proposing. But I am willing to have you go show me homes. And if I buy one of these homes, I am willing to pay you this compensation. And that's what the showing agreement does. So there will be kind of different paths to get to the same place. You know, and we'll go through that, but it's, yes, on the surface, you need to have an agreement prior to showing a home. You need to have an agreement with that buyer that establishes compensation.
I think one of the things that I'm seeing on these Facebook forums, and when it's 2:00 at night, and I've had a couple bourbons,
They're fun. I get it.
You know, I do get sucked in.
But as a broker, it's every time I read there, it's like every single one of those questions should be call your broker, talk to your broker. Why is every agent speculating on this?
So one of the things that I'm reading, and I take exception to, because I think it's harming agents,
Okay.
and it's all about mindset, is when I see these arguments on these forums about the changes in the buyer-broker agreement, people say, well, it's plain and simple. You just got to explain to your buyers it's up to them to pay their agent. This is all about now buyers having to pay agents and so forth. And I take exception to it because nowhere is that written, and my conversation I'm having with my buyers is, after I explain the changes, is you're in a position where you might have to.
Correct.
It's not a foregone conclusion that you as the buyer need to understand. You now have to cough up X amount of dollars at the closing table because it's still negotiable.
Absolutely.
The only thing that has changed for me is it's not on the MLS anymore.
Correct.
And now I have to pick up that phone, and that's the other thing, agents. I hear this, oh, you can't get agents to pick up the phone and when I have a question about their listing anyways. Okay, if I've got a listing and you want to know that the seller's willing to pay you something, don't pick up the phone and call me. Just text me.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to make it easy for you.
Right.
Okay, just text me, and I will
Right.
give you Y or N.
You'd be very. You're like Dean. You're maybe less verbose than I am. The Y or the N.
But that's my perception of things, and I see that where where agents are trying to lecture other agents. You just need to understand that you got to tell your buyers that it's the buyer's responsibility.
Correct.
It's not the buyer's responsibility to pay you. It might be the buyer's responsibility to pay you.
And that is an important distinction to make when it comes to this situation. You're right. It's they are agreeing to compensate you. That's part of the documentation that you need to have them sign that says, yes, you will be compensated this. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going, as you said, to come out of their pocket at close. They have the ability also to instruct you as their agent to try to negotiate that compensation from the seller side, whether it be from the listing agent, whether it be from the seller directly. There are two new forms. There's a broker-to-broker compensation, which that's not the name of it. I think it's a compensation agreement between brokers. And then there's also a seller compensation addendum that will be an attachment that can be sent with a purchase contract at the buyer's direction that says, for this offer, and if this transaction closes, the seller agrees to pay X compensation towards the buyer's agent. And so based on that, there are plenty of paths forward where, yes, the buyers have signed this binding agreement with you, but they may not have to pay any compensation.
Mm-hmm.
It could be all footed by the seller as well. It just depends on the buyer's situation and what they're comfortable with. If there's a home where they've agreed to pay you X bananas and seller's not offering that and the buyer doesn't want to pay that, then they just move on to the next, right? So there's a lot of paths that this will take. There is no one defined direction. We will all see. It may settle in kind of very defined paths, but right now it's kind of we're all feeling it out together, and we will be for a little while here. But to your point, it's not a conversation where buyer you must pay guaranteed period the end. It is certainly not that absolute. It could very easily be. It could also be addressed with concessions from the seller. There's a lot of paths.
So the other thing that I've been hearing and reading, and so I'm following my own advice because I don't know the answer to the question, so I'm asking my broker. Just
Perfect.
In front of the entire large audience here. I've been hearing this term, steering.
Sure.
And if I have my buyer sign a buyer-broker agreement to, let's just call it 3%, and I'm letting them know that, when prior to us going and looking at homes that you're interested in, I'm going to reach out to that other agent and see whether the seller is willing to provide concessions or compensation for me as your agent. In the event that they don't, do you want to see these homes or do you not want to see these homes? Is that an acceptable practice to allow the buyer to make the decision saying, do not show me any homes, don't even send me any homes if we know that I got to pay the 3%.
That the seller won't offset that cost.
Yes.
Yeah, that is a conversation that can be had. I would counter that with, from a buyer's perspective, there's even in a scenario where they've instructed you to reach out to sellers agents to find out if there is compensation being offered, even in a scenario where the answer is no, there is nothing that precludes them from submitting an offer that includes compensation. So I guess the moral of the story, or my point is, that can still potentially be negotiated. Maybe this is their dream home, and seller agent, when you give them the call or shoot them the text, is their compensation offered? That text comes back and says N. Well, if it says N, now I go to my buyer and I say, how do you want? I know this is your dream home. You've told me that. Do you want to still submit? And we can just include compensation to see if that will be offset. And if it's not, then you have a choice to make. Do you want to pay what we've agreed to, or do you want to move on? That's up to you, right? And so it leaves it in the buyer's court, but it's not like a overarching directive that says, I don't want to see any of these, because the reality is negotiation is very much part of our business and part of the home buying process. And it's very possible with the right offer, the seller's like, you know what? Sure, I will actually offer compensation here. And so
See, and I think that's important because I think agents don't understand. First of all, this is a myth out there, and I don't know where it started, but let's just say going back in the past, it's not necessarily highly recommended practice, but there is a belief out there that agents aren't allowed to include any type of compensation language
Right.
on a contract. And my understanding is that is not true. It can be included,
Right.
just the contract can't get held up because of it.
Yeah, that's going to be a big, and is already shown to be a big mental hurdle for kind of all of us to get over. As brokers, we've always advised don't put commission in the purchase contract, because the compensation was already agreed to from the seller through their listing agreement, offered on MLS. So compensation is really between agents. It's not buyer to seller. Well, now with the new world, this whole dynamic is changing, and so we're going to have to be nimble and like I said, get over that mental hurdle, because the reality is, if the buyer directs us to add compensation as part of their offer, there's nothing wrong with that. It absolutely can be negotiated through the offer process, be paid as a result. And there's that, like I said, there's a document that has been created, the seller compensation addendum, that is an addendum to the purchase contract that includes compensation. That's what it's for. So you're right there. I don't know that it's a myth, because as an industry, we perpetuated that myth. We pushed to not include compensation, especially in the residential arena. It's far more commonplace in the commercial arena, but just don't have it as part of your contract. There's no reason for it. It's negotiated, or it's stated elsewhere. But now that's not the case, and so it's going to be very much tied to the offer and negotiation process.
All right, one of the common questions probably the number one question I've been getting.
Yep.
Is, and you and I discussed this last week, so I know the answer to the question.
Got
but
it.
Is there a time limit on the buyer-broker agreement? Are there any rules where if I sit down and have you and your wife sign a buyer-broker agreement with me, can it be for any amount of time that we agree to, or
Right.
is there a specific rule or policy that says it can't go beyond 12 months or something like that?
Yeah, there's not. There's nothing there is no rules surrounding that. So it is a binding contractual document between you and your buyer. I would not suggest making an incredibly lengthy buyer-broker agreement. I don't think I can see that being viewed as not in the best interest of the client, potentially. There's stories of brokerages having 40-year listing agreements out there, and those ended in lawsuits. No surprise there, right? We don't want that. The surface level answer to your question is no. There is no guide. There is no rule that states that there's a cap on the length of time. I would just say be reasonable, as with all things.
All right, so at the end of the day, the buyer-broker agreement is an employment agreement.
Correct.
It's the same thing as an ER, a listing agreement. That is an employment agreement.
Correct.
What do we do? Are we going to be required, or how do we handle the situation when the listing agent says, well, let me see your buyer-broker agreement, or include the buyer-broker agreement with your offer? Because my response is going to be, go pound sand.
Sure.
If you show me yours, I'll show you mine. So show me your listing agreement, and then I'll show you my buyer-broker agreement.
Right.
And then you better not hold up presenting my offer, because I told you to go pound sand.
This is one of the, to me, when we started talking about this in those buyer-broker committee meetings, this will be very interesting to see how it plays out, because I can see that conversation kind of being a stalemate, because you're right. Nobody really ever has asked for a list, like, show me your listing agreement. That was never a piece of conversation that was had when you're
And we all
negotiating.
wanted to see it, but we had to wait till we got the settlement sheet to see who got paid what,
Correct.
right?
But it was, if you had asked, the answer would have absolutely been go pound sand. What motivation would they have had? Now, from the other side of that coin, when there is an employment agreement between agent and buyer broker, and a listing agent asks for that, the answer certainly can be go. There's no obligation to provide it. That's certain. But what if the seller has instructed the listing agent to not present any offers that don't provide the buyer?
There is no seller that would ever come up with that on their own. So if you, as the listing agent, say my seller's requiring to see the buyer broker agreement, my response is, you put that in their head.
I hear you. But there's probably a lot of things you put in their head. You're the expert in their field that they're, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that you've advised them professionally in your relationship as their listing agent.
Well, then I say, well, it's my broker's policy that we do not provide
Sure.
the buyer-broker agreement. And as I submit the offer to you, I'm going to CC my broker and your broker.
And then
I'm kidding.
And
I'm
then
kidding.
they
I'm
send
kidding.
back, they send back the portion of their agreement that has the seller state. I mean, state the directive that they will not accept any offers that don't have that attached. So I'm not saying that that's the path that should be gone down. I'm just saying that this is part of what I'm talking about. We don't know what this is going to look like. I know that there will be a ton of hesitation. You don't want to show it's the art of negotiation. You don't want to show your hand first. I completely understand that. That also may not be up to you to some degree. Like it's your decision, but then again, if it hinders the negotiation process based on the rules of engagement that the seller side has employed, then it's gonna be tough. So I will be very, like I said, I'm really, really interested to see how that dynamic plays out.
Well,
you'll
get
level.
CC'd on all my offers.
That's
you know
what. Delete.
And all right, so we know now August 17th, that date, we will be required to have a buyer-broker agreement in place to go show a home. I think there's a lot of confusion as to open houses. So it's not my listing. I'm holding this house open for another West USA agent.
Right.
And throughout, from 10 to 2, I get 10 parties show up to the door and want to see the house.
Right.
Am I going to be required to have them all sign a document? Because in essence, I am showing them the home, and you can make the argument there's no difference between holding an open house as opposed to just meeting somebody at a house and opening it up.
I hear you. I don't think that that's going to be the case for that particular open house. I don't. My understanding is, and this, I will be candid and say I'm not 100% certain that that's where this will land. But my thought and my understanding currently is that as you hold an open house, you're not going to be required to get the employment agreement with the parties that wander through that may be unrepresented. However, if they wish to go see any further homes, maybe after 2:00 they want to go see the one down the road, and you're willing to do that, at that point is when the buyer-broker agreement must be signed. But again, stay tuned.
Or the showing agreement.
Yeah, or the showing agreement, correct. And it's just, this is a moving target for all of us. We as brokers are learning on the fly as well, doing our best to wrap our heads around the kind of questions that are going to come up. And a lot of it's to be determined. And like I tell people, we'll get through it together.
All right, my last question. I think what hasn't changed is anytime that we're talking with a buyer, we've always had that responsibility to ask if they've entered into a written agreement with another agent. But now there's going to be a lot more yeses because everybody's going to have a buyer broker agreement.
Correct.
So I meet someone, or even if it's somebody in my sphere of influence, and they got hoodwinked, they showed up to an open house and they got tricked, and now they're in this buyer broker agreement for 12 months with an agent that they don't know, don't like, and I asked them, have you entered into an agreement? They say yes. I asked to take a look at it, and I look at it, and they say, I want out. Mike, I want to work with you because we're all gonna be facing that. How do we handle that?
Yeah, you gotta. It's this. That conversation is the same as the current conversation. Unfortunately, I like to your point, hoodwinked. Yes, I understand that sometimes documents get thrown in front of parties that they're not familiar with, and they sign because they've been asked to sign. They don't read, they sign, and it puts them in a bad position because they've now signed a binding document between them and this other agent that they now want to be away from. Your answer is the same as what it would be today, and that is, unfortunately, you're bound to that agent given that document. You need to discuss with the agent mutual cancellation. If you're not happy with the agent's service or you're not happy with the answer you get in that conversation, reach out to the agent's broker and see if there's a path to cancellation. I can't guide you on that. I can't assist you with that. You are their client at that point. But if they do agree to cancel it, I'm happy to work with you. If they don't, you need to work with them for the next 12 months, it sounds like. Unfortunately, signing multiple buyer broker agreements
There's no bueno.
only, and all it does is obligate them to multiple compensation, payments. And so it's not, that doesn't alleviate the issue of the initial buyer broker by signing one with you, because now they just have 2 agents they need to pay.
All right. Well, I could go all morning talking about this,
Yeah.
but we are out of time. I did want to just remind everybody that now we're talking about the practicalities of this. So Brian and I are going to be doing a special class in the morning at Chandler, in the afternoon in the North Phoenix office, just on the practical applications and discussions to have with buyers and sellers with these changes. So just go to sixfigureevents.com and you can choose which location you want to join us at. And what's up, Buttercups with Fouts? Appreciate it, buddy.
Feel free to use Buttercups in your. I'll put it in my email signature.
All right, we leave you with the quote of the day: "Success is how high you bounce when you hit bottom." Appreciate everybody joining us today. Go out and sell a home.